Hello, my darling, and welcome to today's story time. Today we are reading The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. If you like what you hear, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And now, on with our story time. Introduction. On February 1st, 1887, the Lady Vane was lost by collision with a derelict when about the latitude 1 degree south, longitude 100 degree west. On January the 5th, 1888, that is 11 months and 4 days after, my uncle, Edward Prendick, the private gentleman who certainly went aboard the Lady Vane at Callao, and who had been considered drowned, was picked up in latitude 5 degree south and longitude 101 degree west in a small open boat of which the name was illegible, but which is believed to have been the missing schooner Ipecacuanha. He gave such a strange account of himself that he was supposed to be demented. Subsequently, he alleged that his mind was a blank from the moment of his escape from the Lady Vane. His case was discussed among psychologists at the time as a curious instance of the lapse of memory consequent upon physical and mental stress. The following narrative was found among his papers by the undersigned, his nephew and heir, but unaccompanied by any definite request for publication. The only island known to exist in the region in which my uncle was picked up is Noble's Isle, a small volcanic island, uninhabited. It was visited in 1891 by HMS Scorpion. A party of sailors then landed, but found nothing living thereon except certain curious white moths, some hogs and rabbits, and some rather peculiar rats, so that this narrative is without confirmation in its most essential particulars. With that understood, there seems no harm in putting this strange story before the public in accordance, as I believe, with my uncle's intentions. There is at least this much in its behalf. My uncle passed out of human knowledge about 5 degrees south and longitude 105 degrees east, and reappeared in the same part of the ocean after a space of 11 months. In some way, he must have lived during this interval, and it seems that a schooner called the Ipecacuanha, with a drunken captain John Davies, did start from Africa with a puma and certain other animals aboard in January 1887. The vessel was well known at several ports in South Pacific, and it finally disappeared from those seas with a considerable amount of copra aboard, sailing to its unknown fate from Baina in December 1887, a date that tallies entirely with my uncle's story. Sincerely, Charles Edward Prendick. Chapter 1. In the Dinghy of the Lady Vane. I do not propose to add anything to what has already been written concerning the loss of the Lady Vane. As everyone knows, she collided with a derelict within 10 days out from Callao. The longboat, with several of the crew, was picked up 18 days after by H.M. gunboat Myrtle, and the story of their terrible privations has become quite as well known as the far more horrible Medusa case. But I have to add to the published story of the Lady Vane another story, possibly as horrible and far stranger. It has hitherto been supposed that the 4 men who were in the dinghy perished, but this is incorrect, and I have the evidence to prove it, because I was one of the 4 men. But in the first place, I must state that there never were 4 men in the dinghy. The number was 3. Constans, who was seen by the captain to jump into the gig. Luckily for us, but unluckily for him, he did not reach us. He came down out of the tangle of ropes under the stays of the smashed bowsprit. Some small rope caught his heel as he let go, and he hung for a moment head downward, and then fell and struck a block floating in the water. We pulled towards him, but he never came up. I say luckily for us that he did not reach us, and I might almost say luckily for myself, for we had only a small beaker of water and some sodden ship's biscuits with us. So sudden had been the alarm, so unprepared the ship for any disaster. We thought the people on launch would be better provisioned, though it seems they were not, and we tried to hail them. They could not have heard us, and the next morning, when the drizzle cleared, which was not until past midday, we could see nothing of them. We could not stand to look about us because of the pitching of the boat. The 2 other men who had escaped so far, one named Hilmar, a passenger like myself, and a seaman whose name I didn't know. He was a short, sturdy man with a stammer. We drifted, famishing, and after our water had come to an end, tormented by an intolerable thirst for 8 days altogether. After the 2nd day, the sea subsided slowly to a glassy calm. It was quite impossible for the ordinary reader to imagine those 8 days. He has not, luckily for himself, anything in his memory to imagine such a thing with. After the 1st day, we said very little to one another, and lay in our places in the boat, and stared at the horizon, or watched, with eyes that grew larger and more haggard every day. There was misery and weakness gaining upon our companions. The sun became pitiless. The water ended on the 4th day, and we were already thinking strange things and seeing them with our eyes. But it was, I think, the 6th day before Helmar gave voice to the thing we had all been thinking. I remember our voices were dry and thin, so that we bent towards one another and spared our words. I stood out against it with all my might, was rather for scuttling the boat and perishing together among the sharks that followed us. But when Helmar said that if his proposal was accepted, we would have a drink, the sailor came around to him. I would not draw lots, however, and in the night the sailor whispered to Helmar again and again. Then I sat in the bows with my clasped knife in my hand, though I doubt if I had the stuff in me to fight, and in the morning I agreed to Helmar's proposal, and we handed halfpence to find the odd man. The lot fell upon the sailor, but he was the strongest of us and would not abide by it, and he attacked Helmar with his hands. They grappled together and almost stood up. I crawled along the boat to them, intending to help Helmar by grasping the sailor's leg, but the sailor stumbled with the swaying of the boat, and the 2 fell upon the gunwale and rolled overboard together. They sank like stones. I remember laughing at that and wondering why I was laughing. The laugh caught me suddenly, like a thing from without. I lay across one of the thwarts for I know not how long, thinking that if I had the strength I would drink seawater, and maddened myself to die quickly. And even as I lay there I saw, with no more interest than if it had been a picture, a sail coming up towards me over the skyline. My mind must have been wandering, and yet I remember all that happened quite distinctly. I remember how my head swayed with the seas, and the horizon, with the sail above it, danced up and down. But I also remember as distinctly that I had a persuasion that I was dead, and that I thought what a jest it was that they should come too late by such a little to catch me in my body. For such an endless period, as it seemed to me, I lay with my head on the thwart, watching the schooner. She was a little ship, schooner rigged fore and aft. As she came up out of the sea, she kept tacking to and fro in a widening compass, for she was sailing dead into the wind. It never entered my head to attempt to attract attention, and I do not remember anything distinctly after the sight of her side until I found myself in a little cabin aft. There's a dim aft memory of being lifted up to the gangway, and of a big round countenance covered with freckles and surrounded with red hair, staring at me over the bulwarks. I also had a disconnected impression of a dark face, with extraordinary eyes, close to mine, but that I thought was a nightmare until I saw them again. I fancy I recollect some stuff being poured in between my teeth, but that is all. And this, my darling, ends our story time for today. As always, I hope that you have very sweet and creepy dreams. Good night.